And with that, I am very excited to be welcoming Chuck Robison to our ICR conference for this afternoon. Chuck has been very active in the research side of things of Kundalini. He has been chosen in 2019 to continue to lead the Kundalini Research Foundation, which is now located in Austin, Texas. He has multiple degrees in theology, and his career track really took him mostly through HR positions. So he's got a unique combination of philosophy and people skills. He's also a well-known portrait photographer. That is part of the creative side of his life. And it is in his capacity as a photographer that he actually met and photographed Pandit Gopi Krishna in New York back in 1983. And he had actually Chuck had started his work with the Kundalini Research Foundation 3 years prior to that in 1980. So it was a beautiful meeting in 1983 when he did meet Pandit Gopi Krishna. Chuck shared with me yesterday that one of the best times in his life was really from September 2007 to April 2008. It was during that time that he, together with his wife Karen, wrote his second book, The Quantum Conspiracy. It was published later on that year by O Books in London and is currently available on Amazon. But he really enjoyed being a writer without effort. The book just really flowed through him, and he feels that was a big part of expression of his awakening Kundalini at that time. He does have strong political interests and political attunement, which he attributes to one of his great-grandfathers, Stephen F. Hopkins, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. So Chuck and his great-grandfather both share the same March 7th birthday, and Chuck continues to communicate with him across the centuries. So we are very excited to welcome Chuck. Chuck, I look forward to your talk, as I'm sure everyone does, and I will give you a 5-minute warning just before the talk comes up to its closure. So welcome to the ICR meeting.
Thank you so much. Is it Sabine or?
It is Sabine, yes.
Thank you, Sabine. That was wonderful. I sound terrific. Paul, could we give me permission to record this? It won't record without somebody's giving me permission. It says, please record record permission from the meeting host. If I could do that, I don't know how to do it, but if I could do it, I'd like to do it I'd like for Jean to see this presentation. Jean is like a lot of us at 95, the technology is daunting. It's just too much, and I'm finding it myself. So, and I'm sure you are too. So
you should be able to record now.
Okay, let's see what happens. No, can't do that yet. Sabine, don't set the clock until we get this part of it solved, if you don't mind.
Chuck, I'm recording the audio just as a backup.
Okay. Oh, is that you, Clay?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, that's good enough. If it works, it works. Okay. So, I have been looking forward to coming to meet you all 2 hours outside of Toronto, as Paul told me. And I have been looking forward to spending some time there. In the 80s, I spent a bunch of time in Toronto, and I love the area. I love all of it. It's just a spectacular place. And I know I'm not supposed to say that as an American, because as everybody knows, America is the greatest country in the world. But Canada's pretty darn well up there. And by the way, I'm from Austin, Texas now. I grew up in Dallas. But I just want to tell you, Austin's a great place, but please don't come here. There's nothing to do here. There's no music. There's no educational institutions. There are no government installations. It's just a small central Texas town with not much going on. And we prefer to keep it that way. So we won't be having one of these meetings in Austin for that reason. let me just bring you up to speed on where we are. In 1980, Leanne Sorkin invited me to a meeting at Gene Kiefer's office across the street from the public library on Fifth Avenue in New York. And she had just gone to work with him as a consultant. And she said, why don't you come over to this meeting? And so I was in New York Life at the time, and I was one of the youngest officers and the only officer ever appointed from the outside of New York Life. And I went to the meeting. And I'm sitting there, and there's this big table and a bunch of people, and I'm saying, what am I doing here? Over here was Sam Nielsen, who was the director of the International Federation of Institutes of Advanced Study. Here was Gene Kiefer. Then here was Klaus Nobel of the Nobel family. And here was Leanne. And then there was Alex King of the Club of Rome. And here was Ryoichi, one of the Japanese lieutenants who was at the United Nations on the question of population group. And I look around this room, and it was a wonderful conversation, but I said, what am I doing here? And the answer was, it will be revealed to you later. And so what happened after that, I decided that whatever I heard there, I liked it a lot, and I wanted more. And the universe saw to it that the doors opened for me to have that happen. And by the way, I noticed in my life that as I was living it, all of these lines and things just went out this way. And at times it felt like I was going in 15 directions at once. Has anybody ever had that experience? Good, you were lucky. But it felt like this. And now at this point and at this moment in my life, all of these lines have come to right where I am, as if I've arrived at where the destination was. And I was lucky that I was able to break all the rules. I didn't choose to do anything I really didn't want to do. So I wound up with a career in photography. I'm a book author. I've worked with HR issues in corporate America. I was a chaplain at the United Nations. My degree is from Princeton in theology, and on and on and on and on. All the point of it is that looking where these lines come back to me right now, I was prepared for where I am. I went to work with Gene in 1980, and when the present crisis, which somebody has quoted to me, came out in 1982, I was one of the 4 or 5 people that were at Gene's living room, stuffing envelopes with that book, sending it to people that were in the media, wanting them to read it. So I felt like I got in on the part of the ground level of all this. And when Gene, who is now 95, was deciding he was going to release his management of this organization, I figured he'd find somebody really famous, really cool. And around about the 1st of January, he said, look, you're it. I want you to be the director. And I'm totally surprised by that. But here I am. And the longer I'm here, the more I realize that this is something that I was prepared to do. And on top of that, I've had some callings in my life. I'm certain that I was called to the United Nations for 10 years. That was really something. I was called to be a Presbyterian minister, and I went through an ordination for that. And that's a serious event as well. But now, and this is as deep as it gets for me, I feel called to be in this situation and to help this process along. And one of the things that I've learned in my 40 years with being involved with the Kundalini Research Foundation and the study is that the finest, quickest, best way to get people's eyes to glass over and have a stare of incredulity at what you're saying is just to say the word Kundalini. Everybody goes, oh. Does everybody know what I'm talking about? Anybody? You can just shake your head. Yes, I know what you're talking about. So the problem is we're dealing with a subject that is just simply too much for people, and it's totally foreign. Now, you'd think that in this day of science and the rest of it, that this would not be a problem. But what I have observed after a little bit of time is that we have a built-in resistance to anything beyond Jesus loves me, this I know, because the Bible tells me so, as a rule for spiritual growth for most people. That's it. And everybody wants to keep it at arm's length like this. But here's what we're doing in the Kundalini Research Foundation beginning after the 9th January of this year. I listened to all the talk about this for 40 years, and I realized that there was no way to get anything to happen. On top of that, Gopi Krishna had a vision that the research would involve maybe 100 people living together for 2 to 5 years in a simple place with common activities and purposes, and that the theory was that after this time of living together, the somebody in that group, or maybe several somebodies, would wind up as a genius as a result of their Kundalini practices. And that may well be a possibility, but that's such a big idea that it didn't make sense to even try to search that right now. And so I was sitting at this desk one day and I said, wait a minute, I bet Andy Newberg at the University of Pennsylvania would be interested in doing this. Anybody know of Andy Newberg? Anybody? A couple of you. Here is one of his books, How Enlightenment Changes Your Brain. And he is a MD, he's a radiologist. His field in medicine was in emergency trauma medicine. And he is so bright. He's written all these books. One of the ones that just says everything in its title, Why God Won't Go Away. And so I called him and I said, this Chuck Robison, Dr. Newberg, would you be interested in doing some research on Kundalini? And he stopped for a second. He said, oh yeah, I'd love to. That'd be fun. And that was as complex as it was. So now we're in a situation where the people that I'm working with in an advisory group here are putting together the parameters of what we want to do. The first part of the research is we're going to take 1 or 2 people to Philadelphia and we're going to put them through the entire process and see what happens. And then we get that done, we'll be able to further refine what we're doing. But the point of this is to show that there are specific, observable, important changes as a person goes through the process, whatever they use, meditation, whatever, to get this energy moving through their body as a way to, in a way that we can measure it. Now, when I was talking to Andy, we talked about the fact that he would like to write a book about this, and there'll be some peer-reviewed articles as well as a result of the study. And I got to thinking, what would the title of that be? And the title should be, and it won't be, but it should be, is Your Body is the Temple of God. Has anybody ever heard that before? Your body is the temple of God. Well, in Texas, where I grew up, and there are lots of Baptist people, if you heard that saying, what they were saying is don't smoke and don't drink and don't do all the other things you shouldn't do because your body's the temple of God. But is that thunder? Oh, we're going to have a rainstorm here, a Texas rainstorm. At any rate, so when I thought about it, I thought, how could it be that my body is a temple of God when I can't even understand the concept? And yet, when you look at what's going on in our religious tradition, it's all out there. It's all about rules and do's and don'ts, primarily don'ts. And it's not a very healthy kind of thing, as I see it, to get people to really share their spiritual growth. So I started thinking about this, and I realized that if this is the temple of God right here, and you've got one of these too, if this is the temple of God, then God is in here. This is where God does his work. And so one of the things that I try to say to people is, your body is pre-organized, pre-designed, pre-created to have this experience. And it'll only happen when you're ready for it. And by the way, as we all know, it is not something you can create. Over and over again in, where is this? In this one. Has everybody seen this book? Secrets of Kundalini and Panchastavi. Anybody see this? This is one of the great books of Gopi Krishna. Somebody found a document, a rolled up script in one of the caves outside of where he lived, and they brought it to him because they knew he might be able to understand it. And they opened it up, and it's this part of this book right here, there, which is in Sanskrit, in English, and in another part of the language situation. But it's a series of readings that constitute a handbook for how you can meditate to a higher level of consciousness. And this is using 1,000-year-old information. When Gopi Krishna read this, he realized, number one, the author's name wasn't on it. But what he discovered was that the man who wrote it was describing what his own consciousness experience was. And he said, wait a minute, this is 1,000 years old, and I'm here today, and these two documents, mine and his, cross-verify each other. And this makes this incredibly important. So he sat down and he wrote, you're going to love this, a 50,000-word introduction to this book. It's that thick. It's twice the size of what the book is about. But this introduction all by itself is a tour de force of what's going on in our society. It's brilliant. It's absolutely spectacular. If you would like a copy of this, we can arrange to get some of the Canada and drop ship them to maybe you, Paul, and you can ship them, or whatever the way is easy to do. But if you'd like this, let me know and we can work out something to get it to you. This is a special book for me. But what it's all saying and what the research is going to say is, and this is stuff that people would think have thought about it all along, but people don't, the concept that your body is hardwired to find spiritual experiences that are predictable and are in your best interest and promote your spiritual growth. How crazy is that? Has anybody else had that kind of resistance to that thought? Okay, I'm the first. But what I'm seeing is that getting people to talk about this is not easy. And I'm sure that each of you has had the experience of trying to explain where you are in this process to people, and it's just almost impossible because they're saying, tell me how it's going. And so clearly my job and the job of the Kundalini Research Foundation, located now in Austin, Texas, is how do we get people to be aware of the incredible possibility in their bodies, in their lives, in the world? How can we do that? And we're going to figure out a way to answer that, but I'm certain that one of the parts of this is, how do you get people just to be aware of this? So our job, number one, at the Kundalini Research Foundation, located in Austin, Texas in 2020, is to get the word out, the word Kundalini, out to people in ways they haven't happened. Now, one of the things that is in our favor is that Austin, everybody's heard of Austin, right? Willie Nelson and all that stuff, Stevie Ray Vaughan. Austin is in fact the next spiritual center of the United States. Everybody seems to think it's California, and some people who live there think it's New York. But Austin has 3 chakras or energy centers. What is that called? Vortexes that go right down I-35 like this, and they're about 25 miles apart. 1, 2, 3. And the Indians who lived here before referred to this as the purple or the violet crown. But people are aware that this energy system lives right here in Austin. And as a consequence, there is a growing sense that we are about to put that mantle on in Austin. Kundalini, it probably, I'm not sure, but I'd be willing to say that Kundalini is one of the most, it is a very common word in Austin. And everybody knows why, right? On every block in Austin, there is a Kundalini yoga center. And the people who go to the Kundalini yoga center are there to get Kundalini. And they were told that Kundalini, it's not Kundalini, it's Kundalini yoga. And that was Yogi Bhajan's idea when he came to this country in the early 60s. He said, I'm going to call it Kundalini yoga, and I'm going to make it a rights protected name. So Kundalini yoga belongs to them. Good for us. At least it gets it out there. But what we're discovering is that in Austin and other places, the idea of Kundalini, here's what's happened. I spent the better part of this year until March looking forward to being with you all this day at this time in Canada. And I'm sad and stunned that I can't even get into your country. But I look back and I say, wait a minute, there's a reason for this. And let me tell you what I think part of the reason is. In the 13th century, the bubonic plague lasted about 30 years and wound up killing 30% of all of Christendom. A few years later, we began the trip from Europe to America. And by 1515, when Martin Luther posted his 1999 ideas on the door of the Church of Wittenberg, it was time for everything to have changed. And I think that even though this is a painful, difficult, discomforting, a crazy time, this is the foundation of something that's going to come around the world. And it's going to happen very quickly because of the speed that our technology can make things happen. And so what I see happening is, and you all have carried this work, some of you, for a long time. And you know some of the difficulty it is talking to people about this. The time is now. Finally, after all these years, we are ready to deal with Kundalini on a broad spectrum. And here's why. In this country, and I don't know where it is in Canada, but in this country, the major Protestant and Catholic denominations, organizations, divisions, whatever you want to call them, in the last 20 years have lost 60% of our market share. The Presbyterian Church, which I'm familiar with, had 4.2 million people in 1980. Today, they have 1.5, and they're not growing at all. And that's true for the rest of them as well, which means that people are letting go of the old ways, and the field is ready for new information. And nobody wants another religion. In fact, the whole concept of going to another building, and hearing somebody else tell you what you should be doing and tell you what you can't do and what you should do, that part is over, because it's all inside of us. We got it. We understand that. And all we have to do is say, okay, I have all this stuff built into my system. Let's make it, turn it on. Let's make it work. So this is the issue and the place where we are in the world right now. Now, the second thing I want to tell you today is this. I have heard from Gene Kiefer for 40 years about you folks, and I didn't meet any of them until the spring when I finally met Paul, and I met Mike just 2 days ago. But I've heard about you all for a long time. And I know that you all, we don't have anything like you that I'm aware of in Texas or in the United States. You all are dedicated, rugged, well-tested soldiers in this march. And I know it without knowing you. But what we need to do, and this is what I'm here for today, is to suggest to you that we could take our technology, and I'm not a technology guy, so somebody else has to back me up on this, but we could take our technology and begin to put together a network of organizations just in the United States and just in Canada together, and there are several, and have them on a list on a web page or something and say, push this button and get the Canada group, push this button and get the Canadian, whatever it is. But it would show a chance for all of us who were involved in this to be communicating and centralized in one place. And that's something that our two groups can demonstrate. And then others will follow. Does that make sense to anybody? Hello? Clay, thank you very much. Paul, Mike. Okay, Ted. So what I'm suggesting is, one of the things we need is what we're doing right now. We're communicating across boundaries, and we're communicating across time and across ideas. But if we could do this in a more systematic way that supports what we're doing, something tells me that this is one of the keys to what's going on. And now let me just say one more thing about where we are. The myths are all about telling time. Most of the myths are about time because they were made when these people that sat or laid out in the fields all night and watched the stars, and over 1,000 years or 2,000 years or 4 or 5 or 6,000 years, they discovered that the stars did this, that, or the other. And so they said, well, let's make up a story to remind us what happens. So there is one that they made up called the myth of the phoenix. And the phoenix is this big, huge bird that starts flying out, and it flies for 500 years. And then at the end of 500 years, it gets the message and it goes down and it builds a nest of cinnamon twigs. Oh, why cinnamon twigs? I don't know. But it builds a nest of cinnamon twigs, and it sets it on fire, and it jumps on the fire and burns up. And at the end of the fire, and when it's cooled down, out of the ashes rises a new phoenix. And it goes for another 500 years. I think that we are right now, like we were 500 years ago in 1517, when Martin Luther made the change in how we see organized religion. When that happened, that was 500 years ago. We're there now. And I think that this virus is going to be the thing that's going to organize us, motivate us, and change us to make this shift. This is the right time. So I was reading the other day, one of Gopi Krishna's, hold on, here, share screen. Screen. Can everybody see this? I can't see you. Can somebody say yes or no? I can see it.
Yes.
Okay. Let me just go through this. The aim of the evolutionary process is to create a more noble, more sober, more far-seeing, more sensitive, more compassionate and more loving individual. Those who think that their practice of yoga or another spiritual discipline has come to fruition, or that their Kundalini has awakened, would do well to assess their progress by critical examination of their own thoughts, acts, and behavior, to know how far their evolution conforms to the standards set in the great religious scriptures of the world. The first signs of success are a greater regard for truth, a greater measure of self-mastery, steadfastness, altruism, the absence of envy, malice, and hate, and a greater sense of empathy with all human beings. The climax of the practice, namely the vision of God or cosmic consciousness, can be sublime and blissful only when the personality of the seeker evolves in the right direction as a result of the changes brought about in the organism. The reason why all great spiritual teachers, including the founders of the major faiths, have laid greater emphasis on the cultivation of noble qualities than on meditational techniques is obvious in the light of this feat. So now I'm going to just turn this off, stop share. There we go, I'm back. What it's saying to me is that we're going to make progress when we do the things that the Boy Scout motto used to do. A Boy Scout is thrifty, reverent, kind, clean. You remember all that? Or all of the doctrines that have put together with church about how we behave. And here we have a better reason than ever for behaving and becoming good people, because the reward is this possibility of cosmic consciousness. And Gopa Krishna makes it very clear, you will not be able to manipulate yourself into that. This is a gift from you when the universe sees fit to have it given to you. But all of us have the opportunity to do what we're doing and to learn and trying to do these things together. So Sabine, how am I doing on time?
Chuck, you are tuned into my mind because we are right at the 5-minute mark here.
Bless your heart. So I'm going to sing a couple songs now for you to get to use up our time. No, I'm not going to do that. But what I'm going to suggest is this. Number one, I want to come next year. So I'd like for you to invite me to come and be with you in Canada next year. And I will bring my wife, Karen, and I may even bring my little dog, Bella. Where is little Bella? Bella, sweetheart, come here. Come here. Come here, sweetheart. That's it. Come on. Now, Bella is 13 years old, and she's acting like she's even older sometimes. But this is Bella. Isn't she beautiful? Hi, baby. These are all your friends in Canada. So, you okay? All right. We get to know each other. I want to come to Canada. I want to see you all and want to work with you. But between now and then, if you decide to do this, I would love for us to work out a way to bring these groups together. It's not a power play. It's none of that stuff. It's just, it's easier when we can push a button on a computer and send a message out to all kinds of people. You see what I'm saying? And if we do that, we have a much better chance of getting information out that nobody else has ever heard before. And I'm not making, as you can tell, I'm not making this up. This is the time when this is going to happen. And the pandemic is just accelerating the changes that are going to be heard around the world. And because America has an opportunity and Canada has an opportunity, we're in a position of global leadership. And as people watch what's going on in this country, they say, how could you ever be global leadership of anything? Believe me, this is part of the destiny of the world and our destiny. It's a big thing. It's bigger than any of us. But here we are, and we can make a difference. And I hope you will think through with me how to do this and then join me in doing it. And so, Sabine, is that right, Sabine?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So, Sabine, that's everything that I need to say. But next year, if I come to Canada, I'm going to want to give a 5-hour speech.
I think it might be 1 hour during the official presentation, and then the other 4 hours will be some of the most amazing conversations that we have at Paul and Dale's house during the wine and cheese after.
That'll be the best part.
Some of the most philosophical and insightful conversations take place there as well. But we would love to welcome you next year. We all sincerely hope that next year we can have it again in Flesherton under the tent or in Markdale, somewhere in a beautiful hall. And see each other's energy. It's different to not have everyone's energy around. But a huge thank you to you, Chuck. It was an inspiring presentation, and we thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn off the sound, but if I didn't, you'd be able to hear the thunder, and it's about to be a serious rainstorm right here in Austin, Texas. Be sure you don't come to Austin. It's a terrible place. Nobody likes it. There's nothing to do. Don't come to Austin. 10 years ago, there were 1.5 million people less here than there are today. So everybody has already come. Don't come now. I'm kidding. Thank you.
We'll dip our toe in. How about that?
Yeah. Paul, thank you so much. Mike, thank you so much. Folks, it's a real pleasure to meet you. And there's things, but good times are coming. Believe it or not, something very special is about to happen. Thank you. Thank you. Yay.
Thank you, Chuck. And we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to reconvene at 1:45 and welcome Leah for her talk at 1:45.